If you want to know who's going to control the future of human civilization, don't look up at the stars.
Right. Yeah. Keep your eyes on the ground or, well, the water.
Exactly. Don't look inside a microchip, look at a map, and look at the ocean. I mean, we spend so much time obsessing over, orbital space stations or like Mars colonies.
Oh, absolutely. The digital frontier, artificial intelligence, all of that.
Right. We just assume the next great leap in global dominance is going to happen in the cosmos or the metaverse. But the stack of sources yes, you listening right now, shared with us today, makes this incredibly bold claim.
It really does. It completely flips that whole narrative on its head.
Yeah, it argues that the ultimate key to our future is right here on Earth, covering 2/3 of the planet, and we are just fundamentally misjudging its power.
It's a massive blind spot, honestly. In our collective vision, I mean. We're looking absolutely everywhere for the future of geopolitical supremacy, except at the water.
Which brings us to the really fascinating material you sent over for this deep dive. We are jumping into a pretty dense, historically and philosophically layered text today.
Very layered, yeah.
Specifically, these are excerpts from the autobiography of Reverend Sun Myung Moon, and we're focusing on a section titled The Oceanic Era and the Spirit of Korea.
And it is a sweeping, highly ambitious piece of writing. I mean, the author is attempting to weave together centuries of maritime history, profound Eastern philosophy, and some really highly specific modern geopolitical strategy.
All into one unified theory.
Exactly. One unified theory of where humanity is heading next.
Now, before we get into the actual mechanics of this theory, we need to be totally clear about our mission for this deep dive today.
Right, the ground rules.
Yeah, because this text inherently touches on some pretty heavy geopolitical, religious, and, philosophical themes. So our approach today is going to be strictly analytical.
Strictly analytical. We are not here to endorse, validate, or take sides on any of the author's viewpoints.
No political stances, no spiritual claims. We're not taking sides. Our mission is just to neutrally unpack these theories.
Think of us as your guides to the material. We're laying out the arguments exactly as they're presented in the text, so you can just understand the architecture of this really specific worldview.
Right. We want to figure out how this text believes the world works.
And that analytical framework is crucial because the architecture of this argument is complex. I mean, the logic operating underneath these claims requires us to really examine the cause and effect of historical events, at least as the author sees them.
Right. So the core objective today is to understand the author's ultimate argument, that the future of global leadership depends entirely on who controls the oceans.
And not just that, but that the next great superpower will be the nation that successfully blends Western scientific prowess with Eastern spirituality.
It's a massive claim.
What's fascinating here is that to understand this vision of the future, this impending Pacific era, the author insists we first have to look backward.
Oh, yeah, like way backward.
Yeah, to grasp the mechanics of future dominance, the text argues we have to examine the blueprint of the past, starting with a relatively small, rainy island in the Atlantic.
Britain. Let's trace that blueprint. Because the text anchors its futuristic predictions on a very distinct historical premise, right? Whoever controls the seas becomes a world leader.
That's the foundation of the whole argument.
And it uses Britain as its primary case study.
Yeah.
But the author points out that Britain wasn't always this global juggernaut. Historically, being an island actually made them incredibly vulnerable.
Vulnerability is the operative word there. I mean, the text specifically notes how Britain was once subjected to brutal invasions by Vikings.
Right, crossing the waters from Norway and Sweden.
Exactly. When you're an island nation and you don't have a dominant navy, the ocean isn't a buffer. It's just this wide-open vector for attack.
You're completely exposed.
You are essentially at the mercy of anyone who possesses superior maritime capabilities.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this requires a massive psychological shift. Before the 16th century, you could totally imagine a small island nation looking at the ocean as this giant, terrifying moat, right?
Right, just hoping the water keeps the bad guys away.
Yeah. You just pray the moat keeps the enemies out, and when it doesn't, you suffer. But the text identifies a turning point with Queen Elizabeth I.
Yes, a massive turning point.
According to the author, she realized that if Britain didn't achieve absolute control of the sea, the nation would lose everything. So she flipped the script.
She really did.
Instead of treating the ocean as a defensive moat, She decided Britain needed to treat it like a superhighway.
And that psychological shift is exactly what the text highlights, and it details how she executed it through intense, dedicated effort. I mean, she didn't just wish for a better navy.
No, she fundamentally restructured the country's priorities.
Exactly. She mobilized capital, and more importantly, she mobilized technology to build much stronger ships.
Right, and the text explicitly mentions new navigational tools.
Yeah, the compass. She armed those ships with the compass. But the author also emphasizes the human element, the immense courage required. I mean, she manned those technologically advanced ships with sailors who were sent out into the sea not really knowing what was waiting for them beyond the horizon.
And that raises a critical point about motivation, because we often hear the romanticized version of this era.
Oh, sure. The brave explorers mapping the unknown.
Exactly, mapping the unknown for the sake of human curiosity. But the worldview presented in this text doesn't frame it as a noble quest for knowledge, does it?
No, not at all. The author views this through a highly pragmatic, almost clinical lens. According to the text, this maritime expansion was driven by a mastery of material knowledge and technology.
Purely material.
Yeah. Western civilization, centering on Britain, developed specific scientific abilities. And with those abilities, it actively sought to conquer the world. It was a material conquest.
They built an empire with colonies on every continent entirely because they mastered the material science of navigating and exploiting the sea.
The ocean was the mechanism for material dominance.
Which brings us to this massive philosophical paradox at the heart of the text. The author establishes that the West conquered the world through sheer material and technological dominance.
Right.
But then the worldview pivots sharply to the East, specifically to Korea, and draws this stark line in the sand between two entirely different ways of existing.
The dividing line is the conflict between the material and the spiritual. If the West represents technological conquest and the accumulation of capital, the East represents an entirely different hierarchy of values.
Okay, so what does the text say about that?
Well, it argues that the Eastern world has historically refused to discard the spirit in the pursuit of material wealth.
But the author doesn't just say the East prefers spirituality, right? The text claims that if forced into a corner-like, if there's a direct, unavoidable conflict between material gain and spiritual integrity, the East will actively choose to discard the material.
They will willingly let the wealth go to preserve their spiritual core.
That's a huge claim.
And the author is brutally honest about the consequences of that societal choice. The text admits that prioritizing the spirit over capital and technology has historically made life much more difficult in the East.
Yeah, they endured immense hardship.
They were less materially developed. They didn't build the sprawling, wealthy global empires that nations like Britain did.
See, I have to push back on this on behalf of everyone listening.
Okay, go for it.
If the East's historical prioritization of the spirit actively made their lives harder and actively left them less technologically developed for centuries, centuries, how does the author justify the leap that Korea and its Asian neighbors are suddenly perfectly equipped to lead a modern, hyper-tech-driven, globalized world?
It does sound like a contradiction, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a total contradiction.
Yeah.
How do you go from rejecting materialism to leading a global material economy?
If we connect this to the bigger picture the author is painting, the logic actually relies on that exact friction.
Oh.
Yeah. The text tracks human civilization as a progression like a baton being passed through time and geography. It moves from the river valleys of Egypt to the peninsulas of Greece and Rome, to the island of Britain, across the Atlantic to the continental United States.
And now
it is shifting toward the Pacific region, centering on the Korean peninsula.
So there's a geographical pattern to the shift.
Yes, but more importantly, there's a philosophical trigger for the shift. The text argues that a civilization built entirely on materialism has a fatal structural flaw.
A fatal flaw.
Right. The author states that totally materialistic civilizations inevitably bring about their own degradation. They collapse inward from moral and spiritual bankruptcy.
So the rapid rise of Korea and Japan to international prominence isn't a coincidence.
Exactly. And it isn't about them suddenly beating the West at its own game from scratch. The author views this as a historical inevitability.
Meaning, the West pushes the technology as far as it can go, but loses its soul in the process, essentially hitting a wall.
Precisely. As the West experiences this hypermaterial degradation, a global vacuum opens up. And the world desperately needs the spiritual orientation that the East preserved through all those centuries of hardship.
So it's not a takeover.
No, the new era the author envisions is not about the East conquering the West. It is a synthesis.
The Pacific era requires taking the incredible material tools the West perfected, like the capital, the technology, the science, and steering those tools with the spiritual wisdom the East refused to abandon,
That's the core idea.
becoming the center of global civilization by fusing high-tech capitalism with deep spiritual stewardship. It sounds like a utopian vision,
It does sound beautiful on paper.
but in reality, becoming the new center of the world puts a glaring target on your back.
It absolutely does.
And this is where the text makes a fascinating transition from grand historical philosophy into the very sharp, dangerous teeth of modern geopolitics.
The author is deeply pragmatic about the reality of power. I mean, the text explicitly warns that the current global heavyweights, specifically naming the United States and Russia, will not passively watch as Korea and its neighbors assume world leadership.
Because hegemony does not concede willingly.
Never.
The text outlines a genuinely terrifying scenario. It predicts the high probability of a major geopolitical flashpoint involving the United States, Japan, Russia, and China.
All clashing in the immediate vicinity of the Korean peninsula.
Yeah, the geopolitical stakes are literally existential.
Because the threat is existential, the author argues that preparation is mandatory. And the text lays out two distinct methods of preparation to survive this civilizational shift.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first method is entirely ideological and diplomatic. To create a protective shield around Korea, the author proposes forging an unbreakable bond between Japan and the United States,
Okay.
and then systematically linking that alliance to Russia and China.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the mechanism for this massive alliance isn't military deterrence. And it isn't a free trade agreement.
No, it's ideological.
Right. The text claims the only way to build this shield is through an ideology the author calls a philosophy of oneness, like a mindset that fundamentally transcends race, nationality, and religion.
Yes.
But let's look at this critically for a second. Can you really stop heavily armed, deeply entrenched superpowers from going to war just by planting a philosophy of oneness? To a modern geopolitical analyst, doesn't that sound like bringing a philosophical poem to a nuclear standoff?
In a conventional framework, absolutely. I mean, soft power is usually viewed as completely secondary to hard military capability. But the logic operating in this text flips that assumption. The author's premise is that hard power is merely the trigger. The justification for pulling the trigger is always rooted in rigid religious or nationalistic identities.
The whole us versus them mentality.
Exactly. So the philosophy is designed to dismantle the justification.
Okay, I see.
The text views this spiritual unity not as a feel-good platitude, but as an ideological software patch. If you only fight weapons with weapons, you just escalate the physical destruction.
Right. Mutual assured destruction.
Yeah. The philosophy of oneness is presented as the only functional mechanism capable of dissolving the borders in the minds of the combatants.
Which neutralizes the threat of massive holy wars or nationalistic clashes.
Exactly. You have to remove the psychological permission for war before the weapons are ever drawn.
That makes the philosophy less of a poem and more of a strategic disarming mechanism.
It does. But this raises an important question, though. I mean, the author knows that philosophy alone won't sustain a civilization.
No, you need resources. You need a physical foundation.
Which leads directly into the text's second, highly tangible method of preparation for the future: economics and energy.
Right. The survival strategy isn't just spiritual. It is fiercely physical. It's about preparing for what the author calls the oceanic era by securing the actual energy source of the future.
Because the text points out a simple, undeniable geographic reality. 2/3 of the Earth's surface is water.
And the author extrapolates a massive economic imperative from that, right?
Yeah. If 2/3 of the Earth is water, then 2/3 of the raw materials humanity will absolutely need to survive are locked in the ocean.
That makes sense.
The argument is that human civilization simply cannot advance or even maintain its current state without mastering those oceanic resources.
And the text notes that developed nations are well aware of this. I mean, they're already out there, drilling into the ocean floors, extracting crude oil and natural gas, and selling it at a massive premium.
But the author identifies a ticking clock. Crude oil reserves are decreasing. There is a looming daily crisis over energy.
Yeah, the text starkly warns that if the world runs out of oil without a replacement, human civilization will immediately find itself plunged into the dark.
What's particularly revealing is how the text analyzes modern attempts to solve this energy crisis. It looked at the push for alternative energies, specifically mentioning biofuels derived from corn, and it completely dismisses them as unviable.
Wait, why does the author reject biofuels? A lot of people see that as a green alternative.
The logic is grounded in basic human survival and resource allocation. The text argues that there currently isn't enough food being distributed to feed the global population as it is.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, turning potential food sources into fuel while people are starving is fundamentally unsustainable. It is a civilizational dead end.
So if oil is a dying resource and using agriculture for fuel starves the population, what is the mechanism for survival?
The text claims the true infinite alternative energy source is the ocean itself, specifically extracting energy from the hydrogen in the sea.
Hydrogen.
Yes, the author unequivocally states that hydrogen from the ocean represents the absolute future of humanity.
Think about the paradigm shift required here. I mean, the author is demanding we stop looking at the ocean merely as a giant fish tank or a transit system for cargo ships and start viewing it as an infinite liquid battery.
A liquid battery,
Well,
exactly.
but how does the text envision us actually unlocking this battery? Because the hydrogen is sitting out there, but we can't just wait on the beach for this oceanic era to magically solve our problems.
No, we definitely can't. And this is where the text brings its entire argument full circle, kind of echoing the story of Queen Elizabeth's brave sailors we talked about earlier.
Oh, the courage part.
Yes. The author forcefully stresses that this oceanic era will not materialize without immense human grit. You cannot passively wait for what the text calls heavenly fortune.
So you have to go out and get it.
If historical fortune arrives and you aren't actively prepared to harness it, the opportunity vanishes.
It requires action.
It requires daring, physical action. The text insists that people must literally go out on boats and fight the waves.
Fight the waves.
There must be a physical confrontation with the elements. The author's core thesis is that the nation possessing the specific courage to conquer the oceans will become the dominant power in the world.
And as a natural byproduct of that dominance, other nations will flock to study its culture, its language, and its methods.
Exactly.
But importantly, this conquest of the ocean can't look like the Western material conquest we discussed earlier, right? It has to tie back to the East's spiritual preservation.
That is the ultimate synthesis the text is driving toward. The argument is that Korea must become the champion steward of the Pacific Ocean.
Steward, not just an exploiter.
Right. This isn't about reckless drilling and ruthless extraction, which the author links to that Western degradation we talked about. It is about understanding the underlying will of the Creator and managing the Earth's resources with profound respect.
It's the marriage of high-tech hydrogen extraction and deep spiritual stewardship.
Yes, the technology harvests the power, but the spirituality ensures the power doesn't destroy the planet or the people wielding it.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and look at the massive architectural logic of the worldview this text just walked us through.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We started by examining the past Queen Elizabeth I, making a desperate, massive gamble on maritime technology, turning the ocean from a defensive moat into a superhighway.
Which allowed the West to build a sprawling empire based purely on material science.
Right. Then the author revealed the friction between that Western hypermaterialism, which is now facing internal degradation, and the Eastern commitment to preserving the spirit, even at the cost of historical suffering.
We then explored the dangerous geopolitical reality of transferring global power. We looked at how the text argues that a radical philosophy of oneness is the only ideological software patch capable of preventing heavily armed superpowers from destroying each other over the Korean peninsula.
And finally, we arrived at the tangible mechanism for humanity's survival, looking past failing oil reserves and unsustainable biofuels to tap into the infinite hydrogen battery of the ocean.
A feat requiring both the physical courage to fight the waves and the spiritual wisdom to steward the resources rather than just exploit them.
When you synthesize all these arguments, its relevance to how you view the world around you today is striking.
It really is. We spend so much of our public discourse looking up at the stars, pouring billions into the space race, or looking inward at the servers powering artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we get distracted.
But this text powerfully forces us to look down at the map. It argues that humanity's ultimate survival, the solution to our energy crisis, and the future of global leadership depend on mastering the oldest, most expansive, and most ignored frontier right here on Earth.
The water covering our own planet, It really fundamentally alters your perspective.
Yeah.
You don't look at the coastline the same way after unpacking a theory like this.
You really don't.
And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final lingering question to ponder on your own today. Think about this, building on everything we just discussed. If the logic of this text holds true, that the future of global dominance absolutely requires blending cutting-edge high-tech science with a profound spiritual stewardship of the ocean, how might that completely upend the way modern corporations and governments approach things like climate change and marine conservation?
That is the big question.
Will the next great superpower actually be the one that learns to treat the ocean not just as a commodity to be ruthlessly drained, but as a sacred trust to be protected and managed?
It's a completely different paradigm.
It's a fascinating, challenging lens through which to view the future of our blue planet. Thank you so much for sharing such a thought-provoking, heavily layered stack of sources with us today.
Yeah, this was incredible to go through.
It's exactly the kind of deep material that makes unpacking these topics so rewarding. Until next time, keep diving deep.